Yo, this just flipped the gun world on its head. Congress actually passed a bill dropping the Suppressor and SBR tax down to zero. I'm not kidding. That $200 NFA fee that's been around since 1934? Gone. What's up? This is Luke from Line 45. Today, we're talking about how this move just cracked the NFA wide open and might finally kill off those Suppressor and SBR restrictions we've been stuck with for nearly a century. Before we dive in, do me a solid, smash that subscribe, tap the bell, hit all the dang buttons down there. You don't gotta, but it keeps this train rolling and lets me crank out more of this wild gun talk for y'all. Alright, enough of that. Let's get back to it. The day the $200 NFA tax finally got hit. This one hit me like a curveball. I've been watching gun bills crawl through Congress for years, and I honestly didn't expect this one to land. They actually passed a bill that drops the NFA tax for suppressors and short-barreled rifles to $0 flat. That's not a rumor. It's tucked inside that big H.R. 1 package everyone's been arguing about. What blows my mind is that this single line of text basically pulled the plug on the part of the National Firearms Act that made it legal in the first place. Back in 1934, the Supreme Court said the NFA was fine because it was a tax, not a ban, in Sonzinski versus United States. But if there's no money changing hands anymore, what exactly are they taxing? I've been through the NFA process myself, waiting months for approvals, fingerprints, all that junk. The backlog is insane, and even with e-forms, most folks are waiting half a year or more. So when Rep. Andrew Clyde, out of Georgia, pushed this move, saying it was about modernizing an outdated law, I got it. Senator Mike Crapo from Idaho backed it too, calling it common sense since the fee never served a real purpose anymore. They're not killing the NFA outright, but they just ripped out the one thing that gave it constitutional cover. No cap. If the courts agree this is no longer a tax system, the Suppressor and SBR rules we've lived under for nearly 90 years could finally start falling apart piece by piece. How we got here. When I first learned about the NFA's history, I couldn't believe how wild the logic behind it was. Back in 1934, the National Firearms Act wasn't really about safety. It was a money play. Congress slapped a $200 tax on machine guns, short-barreled rifles, and suppressors, knowing full well that $200 back then was worth over $4 grand today. The goal wasn't to collect money, it was to make owning one of those guns flat-out unaffordable during the Great Depression. And when the law got challenged, the Supreme Court in Sonzinski versus United States basically said, hey, it's a tax, so it's fine. That ruling is what kept the NFA alive all these years, even though everyone knew it was more about control than revenue. I've always found it kinda crazy that a rule built on a tax is what's still holding down suppressors and SBRs 90 years later. Over time, the public image of these items totally changed. What used to be seen as gangster gear turned into everyday gear for hunters, sports shooters, and folks trying to save their hearing at the range. There are now more than 4 million registered suppressors in the US, and 43 states allow them legally. The demand's huge because modern shooters know they're not silencers like in the movies, they just drop noise by about 30 decibels. So, when you realize the NFA tax was never about crime prevention, just a relic from a broke government in 1934, it makes sense why so many Americans think it's time to let that law finally die. The political knife fight. This fight got spicy fast. The minute Congress zeroed the NFA transfer and made tax for suppressors and SBRs, Senator Chris Murphy jumped in with an amendment to spike the tax to about $4,709, pegged to $1,934. I read his pitch as keep deterrence, but to me, it's a straight price wall that would freeze out normal buyers. Trade groups and gun media flagged that number right away, and it wasn't random. It tracks to an inflation math that turns a Depression-era $200 into a 2025 $4 grand hit. On the other side, GOA and partners didn't just issue statements. They filed in federal court, arguing the NFA's constitutional hook was always the tax power from Sonzinski versus the United States. If Congress set the tax to zero, then the scheme isn't a tax system anymore, it's just federal gun registration and permission slips. I've gone through that process myself, and it feels like a registry with extra steps. Their filings and coverage spell it out. The one big beautiful bill zeroed most NFA taxes, so the revenue rationale is gone. That's the whole play. Murphy's camp leans hard on public safety vibes around silencers, and I get the optics, but the real-world numbers don't match movie myths. Modern cans typically cut about 20 to 35 decibels, which still leaves most centerfire gunshots loud enough to be heard blocks away and absolutely not silent. Meanwhile, the political trench war is ongoing. Republicans packaged the $0 move inside a mega bill, Democrats blasted it as dangerous, and the press framed it as watering down the NFA without killing it. From where I sit, this is a knife fight over first principles. If courts accept that zero tax equals no tax power, then the government has to defend the NFA's suppressor and SBR rules under Bruin history and tradition instead of a revenue label, and that's a very different game. The Texas offensive. When I saw how many states jumped into this fight, I knew this wasn't just another gun rights headline. 15 states straight up linked arms to back the lawsuits against the NFA after the zero tax change hit. We're talking Texas, Alaska, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. That lineup reads like a who's who of pro-Second Amendment states. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton led the charge, filing an amicus brief that basically said, if there's no tax, there's no constitutional justification for the feds to keep regulating this. He's not wrong. The NFA was only upheld under Congress's power to tax, not regulate. If the tax is now zero, that foundation crumbles. Montana and Idaho governors both threw public support behind it, calling the NFA's structure a relic of a bygone era. You've got state legislatures drafting mirror resolutions supporting Paxton's argument, framing it as a state sovereignty and Second Amendment issue rolled into one. And I can't lie, it's a smart strategy. They're filing everything in the Northern District of Texas, where recent rulings slapped the ATF over pistol braces, ghost guns, and forced reset triggers. The Fifth Circuit's been the friendliest ground for gun owners since Bruin, so stacking cases there sets up the perfect pipeline to challenge the NFA piece by piece. If this state coalition keeps the momentum, the ATF's chokehold on suppressors and SBRs might not just weaken, it could flat out break. Courtroom chess. I've been watching the Texas lawsuits play out, and it's honestly turning into a masterclass in courtroom strategy. The gun rights lawyers picked the Northern District of Texas for a reason. That court's already handed down wins against the ATF on pistol braces, ghost guns, and forced reset triggers. They know the judges there actually read Bruin like it was written, not like it's optional. The idea is simple. Get a solid pro-Second Amendment ruling at the district level. Let the DOJ appeal it, and push it right back into the Fifth Circuit, where the odds are stacked in their favor. That circuit already embarrassed the ATF multiple times, so they're betting it'll do it again with suppressors and SBRs. On top of that, there are two major Supreme Court petitions in play right now. Rush versus Garland and Robinson versus Garland both challenge the NFA's treatment of short-barreled rifles using the same Bruin logic that crushed New York's carry restrictions. The Supreme Court told the DOJ to file formal responses instead of just denying them, which is rare. That alone shows the justices are paying attention. If the court grants cert, we could see the NFA's tax-based restrictions ripped apart nationwide. If they pass for now, it doesn't mean it's over. The Fifth Circuit's rulings are lining up perfectly for a return trip to SCOTUS later. From what I'm seeing, every piece is moving toward one question. When there's no tax left to justify the NFA, does the ATF still have any business controlling what kind of rifles and suppressors Americans own? Bureaucracy on borrowed time. This whole thing turned into a political slugfest the second that $0 tax hit the books. Senator Chris Murphy out of Connecticut came flying in with a proposal to hike the NFA tax to around $4,079 per gun, saying it should keep up with inflation from $1,934. That's basically $4,000 in today's money, when adjusted correctly. And it's hard to see that as anything but a wall to block average folks from owning suppressors or short-barreled rifles. I read the hearing transcripts and news write-ups, and Murphy said it was about maintaining safety standards. But that doesn't track. Studies from the CDC, DOJ, and even independent research groups like the American Suppressor Association show suppressors don't make guns silent. They cut noise by about 25 to 35 decibels, which still leaves a rifle around 130 decibels loud, louder than a jet engine at takeoff. Meanwhile, gun rights groups like the Gun Owners of America, Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition, and Silencer Central weren't having it. They filed lawsuits arguing the NFA's whole legal foundation, based on Congress's power to tax from Sunzinski versus the United States, crumbles if there's no tax being collected. If there's no money, it's not a tax law anymore. I've read parts of the filings, and the language is blunt. The ATF is acting like a regulator, not a tax collector. The Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute even jumped in with legal memos, saying this new $0 setup turns the NFA into a pure control scheme, with no constitutional leg to stand on. It's become a full-on chess match between politicians trying to keep their public safety brand, and courts starting to see how hollow that logic really is. No cap, this isn't just politics anymore. It's a live test of whether the federal government still gets to tax rights it's supposed to protect.